My name is Mac Williams, and at 68 years old, I thought I knew heartbreak. That was until my daughter-in-law Stephanie called me 3 days before Father's Day. I had been looking forward to dinner with my son Frank, his wife, and my grandkids for weeks. The tie I bought Frank was wrapped and ready. Then my phone rang. Her voice was cold as ice. "We think it would be better if you didn't come this Sunday. Where are you watching from today?" Hit that like button and subscribe while I tell you how that mortgage check they counted on every month suddenly disappeared. To understand why being uninvited from a Father's Day dinner cuts so deeply, you need to know about my family. My beloved wife Margaret passed away 10 years ago after 40 wonderful years together. Since then, it has just been me and our only son, Frank. He is 37 now, works as a software engineer for a tech company in the city, and has always been the center of my world. Frank was always a bright kid. Even as a boy, he could take apart and reassemble just about anything electronic. I still remember the Christmas when he was 12 and we spent the entire day building a radio together. Those were the golden days of our relationship. We would go fishing at Lake Harmony every summer, and he would tell me about his dreams of creating computer programs that would change the world. Our bond remained strong through his college years. I worked extra shifts at the manufacturing plant to help pay his tuition. Not because I had to, but because I wanted to. Seeing him graduate with honors was one of the proudest moments of my life. After Margaret died, Frank was my rock. He would come over twice a week for dinner, and we would watch baseball games together just like we did when he was growing up. Everything changed when he met Stephanie 6 years ago. Frank had dated several nice girls before, but Stephanie was different from the start. She worked as a real estate broker and had what people call expensive taste. Our first meeting was at an upscale restaurant that Frank could barely afford. I noticed how she ordered the priciest items on the menu without even glancing at the prices. "Dad, this is Stephanie," Frank had said with that look in his eyes. Love, for sure, but also something else, something that worried me, a desire to impress her at any cost. "So nice to finally meet you, Mac," she said with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Frank tells me you worked in manufacturing all your life. That must have been interesting." The way she said interesting made it clear she thought it was anything but. Still, I tried to be supportive. Frank was happy, and that was what mattered most to me. They got engaged after only 6 months of dating. The wedding was an extravagant affair with 200 guests at a country club overlooking the lake. I quietly paid for half of it when Frank called me in a panic about the deposits. Stephanie had insisted on Alaskan king crab for the appetizer and an open premium bar. The final bill was more than Frank made in 3 months. "Dad, I hate to ask," Frank had said nervously over the phone, "but the venue needs another $5,000 by tomorrow or we lose our date." "Son, of course I will help," I told him. "This is your big day." What I didn't say was that I was dipping into my retirement savings to make it happen, or that I had already contributed $10,000 to their wedding fund. Some things a father just does without question. After the honeymoon in Bali, another expense I suspected they could ill afford, Frank and Stephanie began looking for a house. Not a starter home, mind you, but a 4-bedroom colonial in the most prestigious neighborhood in town. The mortgage payments would be more than 40% of their combined income, a financial stretch by any standard. "Dad, we found the perfect house," Frank told me over dinner at my place, "but we are a little short on the down payment." Stephanie jumped in before I could respond. "My clients always say real estate is the best investment. We would be crazy to let this house slip away." I looked at my son's hopeful face and found myself agreeing to loan them 20% for the down payment. Loan was the word we used, but I suspected even then that repayment wasn't a priority for Stephanie. What began as a one-time gift evolved into a monthly contribution toward their mortgage payment. Not the whole amount, but enough to ease their financial strain. It was never formally discussed. I simply sent a check on the 1st of every month, and they never refused it. The one bright spot in all of this was my grandchildren. Jessica came along a year after the wedding, followed by Tyler 3 years later. Jessica, now 9, inherited Frank's intelligence and curiosity. She loves books and can spend hours telling me about the solar system or dinosaurs. Tyler, at 6, is all energy and laughter. He loves when I make silly faces or tell him stories about when his daddy was a little boy. My time with my grandchildren became the highlight of my weeks. I would pick Jessica up from school on Tuesdays and take her to the library, then to the ice cream shop, where she always ordered mint chocolate chip. On Thursdays, I would take Tyler to the park where he would climb everything in sight while I watched with a mixture of pride and terror. Stephanie, however, seemed to view my relationship with the children as some kind of competition. She began scheduling activities that conflicted with our standing dates. Dance lessons suddenly appeared on Tuesday afternoons. Soccer practice materialized on Thursday evenings. "Sorry, Mac," she would say with that same smile that never reached her eyes. "The kids are just so busy these days. Maybe next week." Next week rarely came without me having to negotiate and rearrange. I began to feel like a visitor in their lives rather than family. Still, I persisted. I showed up at school performances and soccer games. I remembered birthdays and brought thoughtful gifts. I was determined to be present in my grandchildren's lives, even as Stephanie erected more barriers between us. Frank noticed the tension but chose the path of least resistance. "Dad, Stephanie just wants the best for the kids," he would say when I expressed concern. "She has their schedules mapped out to give them every advantage." I began to see less and less of my son as well. Our baseball nights dwindled from weekly to monthly, then to special occasions only. When we did talk, the conversation revolved around work, stress, and financial pressure. Yet each time I visited their home, I noticed new furniture, expensive electronics, or Stephanie wearing designer clothes with tags I recognized from magazine advertisements. The distance between us grew, one canceled plan and one missed phone call at a time. But nothing prepared me for what was to come. A Father's Day that would change everything. I started noticing more concerning changes in Stephanie's behavior about 2 years ago. What began as subtle coldness evolved into outright rudeness. If I brought dessert for dinner, she would comment that it wasn't organic or that the kids had already had too much sugar that week. If I suggested an outing with the grandkids, she would sigh dramatically before listing all the reasons it wouldn't work with their schedule. "Mac, we really prefer the children to stick to their routines," she would say within earshot of Jessica and Tyler. "Structure is so important at their age." The worst part was when she would make dismissive comments about me in front of the children. "Grandpa's from a different generation," she once told Jessica when I suggested helping with her science project. "He doesn't really understand how schools work nowadays." The hurt on Jessica's face mirrored my own feelings. She looked at me apologetically as Stephanie guided her away. Later, when Stephanie was in the kitchen, Jessica whispered, "I would have liked your help, Grandpa. You tell the best stories about science." Family gatherings became exercises in exclusion. When Frank's cousin got married, Stephanie somehow forgot to tell me about the family brunch the next morning. For Thanksgiving, I was invited but seated at the far end of the table from my son and grandchildren. Christmas brought the painful discovery that they had taken the kids to Aspen for a ski vacation without even telling me they would be away. I found out when I dropped presents at their empty house. Frank's reaction to all this was perhaps the most hurtful aspect. My son, who once stood by me through everything, became increasingly distant and defensive. When I tried to talk to him about Stephanie's behavior, he would immediately shut down. "Dad, you just don't understand the pressure we are under," he said after I mentioned being excluded from Tyler's school play. "Stephanie works really hard to keep this family running smoothly." "I understand pressure, son," I replied. "I raised you while working 60-hour weeks after your mother got sick." "That was different," he said, looking away. "Times have changed." What he really meant, I realized, was that his loyalty had changed. Every conversation became a minefield, with Frank ready to defend Stephanie's actions, no matter how hurtful they might be to me or even to the children. Last year's Father's Day was a preview of what was to come. I was invited to their house for dinner, but it felt more like an obligation than a celebration. Stephanie controlled every aspect of the evening. The meal was served precisely at 5, despite Frank mentioning that a later dinner would be nice so we could watch the baseball game first. The gift the children gave me was clearly selected by Stephanie, a generic grilling apron with "World's Greatest Grandpa" printed on it, despite the fact that I had mentioned several times that my apartment building didn't allow grills on the balconies. "The children picked it out specially," Stephanie insisted, though Jessica's face told a different story. The entire evening I felt like an intruder in their home. Stephanie checked her watch repeatedly, and by 7:30 she was clearing plates and mentioning that the children needed to prepare for bed. "It's Sunday night, and they have a full week ahead," she explained as she all but pushed me toward the door. I hadn't even had a chance to read the card Tyler had made for me. I tried numerous approaches to mend whatever rift had formed. I brought extra gifts for the children, careful to select educational toys that even Stephanie couldn't object to. I attempted to have private conversations with Frank, suggesting we meet for lunch near his office. I even offered to help with house projects that Frank had mentioned were on his to-do list for months. Each effort was met with lukewarm response or outright rejection. "Frank is too busy this week," Stephanie would say when I called. "Maybe try again next month." I began noticing other troubling signs as well. Despite their supposed financial struggles, Stephanie arrived at a family dinner wearing a handbag. I later looked up online and discovered cost nearly $3,000. Frank mentioned canceling their anniversary trip due to budget concerns, yet 2 weeks later, Stephanie posted photos on social media from a weekend at a luxury spa resort. The most disturbing discovery came through a chance encounter at the grocery store. I ran into Alicia, who had worked with Stephanie at the real estate office. "How is Stephanie enjoying her break from work?" Alicia asked innocently as we stood in the checkout line. "Break?" I asked, confused. She mentioned being extremely busy with clients recently. Alicia's expression shifted to discomfort. "Oh, I thought you knew. Stephanie left the agency almost 3 months ago. She said she wanted to focus on family for a while." That evening, I called Frank directly on his cell phone. "Son, I ran into Alicia today. She mentioned Stephanie isn't working at the real estate office anymore." A long pause followed. "She is transitioning to a new agency," he finally said. "It is all very recent." Alicia said it has been 3 months, I pressed. "Dad, our finances are not your concern," he snapped. "We are adults managing our own lives." The conversation ended abruptly, but it confirmed my suspicions. Stephanie had been lying, not just to me but possibly to Frank as well. The mortgage checks I had been sending, ostensibly to help them through a tight financial period, were likely funding Stephanie's growing taste for luxury while she wasn't even working. I felt sick knowing I was being taken advantage of, but even worse was the realization that my son was either complicit or being manipulated himself. Either way, our relationship had deteriorated to a point where honest conversation seemed impossible. The tension was building, like pressure in a boiler with no release valve. Something would have to give, and soon. The situation reached a breaking point on a rainy Tuesday in April. I was at home working in my small vegetable garden that I maintain in containers on my apartment balcony when my phone rang. It was the school nurse from Tyler's Elementary. "Mr. Williams? This is Mrs. Peterson from Lakeside Elementary. Tyler has a fever of 101, and we have been unable to reach his parents. You are listed as the emergency contact." My heart raced with both concern for my grandson and frustration that I was only remembered when convenient. "Of course, I will be there right away," I told her. I found Tyler in the nurse's office, his cheeks flushed and his usually energetic demeanor subdued. "Grandpa," he said weakly, reaching for me, "I don't feel good." "I know, buddy," I said, gathering his backpack and jacket. "Grandpa is going to take care of you." After signing him out, I tried calling both Frank and Stephanie. No answer from either. I left messages explaining the situation and letting them know Tyler would be at my apartment. I stopped at the pharmacy for children's fever reducer, then settled Tyler on my couch with his favorite cartoon and a cool cloth for his forehead. It was nearly 5 in the evening when my phone finally rang. Stephanie's voice was tight with anger. "Where is my son?" she demanded without preamble. "Hello, Stephanie. Tyler is here with me. He had a fever at school, and no one could reach you or Frank. I picked him up as the emergency contact." "You should have taken him to our house," she said. "You know I don't like the children being in that apartment of yours. It's too small, and who knows what germs are there." I took a deep breath, reminding myself that my priority was Tyler's well-being. "Stephanie, I tried calling both of you multiple times. Tyler needed immediate care. He is resting comfortably now, and his fever has come down. We will be there in 20 minutes, she said, and hung up. When they arrived, Frank looked tired and stressed. Stephanie burst through my door without knocking, going straight to Tyler, who had fallen asleep on the couch. "Why is he just lying here?" she demanded. "He should be in bed." "He wanted to watch cartoons," I explained calmly. "The doctor always said rest and fluids are the best medicine for a simple fever." "What would you know about current pediatric advice?" she snapped, gathering Tyler's things. "Frank, Carry him to the car. I don't want him walking in his condition." Frank gave me an apologetic glance but said nothing as he lifted his drowsy son. "I left his backpack by the door," I said, following them. "And there is fever reducer in the front pocket. He can have another dose at 8. Stephanie acted as if she hadn't heard me. As they were leaving, Tyler woke up enough to wave at me. "Thanks for the ice cream, Grandpa," he said sleepily, referring to the small cup I had given him when his fever first broke. Stephanie froze. "You gave him ice cream? When he is sick? That's exactly why you shouldn't be left in charge. No wonder he isn't better yet." Before I could respond, they were gone, with Frank still not having said a single word to me. 2 days later, I went to their house to check on Tyler. Stephanie answered the door with a cold stare. "We need to talk," she said, leading me to the kitchen rather than inviting me properly inside. Frank was sitting at the table, looking uncomfortable. "Tyler is fine now," she began. "No thanks to the sugar and disruption to his routine. Mac, we appreciate that you want to be involved, but you overstepped by taking him to your apartment." I looked at Frank, expecting him to defend me, but he studied the tabletop instead. "Overstepped?" I repeated incredulously. "I am his grandfather. I was called by the school when neither of you responded. What was I supposed to do? Leave him there? You could have brought him home and waited here," Frank finally spoke, though he still wouldn't meet my eyes. "The nurse needed someone to take responsibility for him," I explained. "I couldn't just drop him off at an empty house." "Well, going forward," Stephanie continued, as if I hadn't spoken, "we think it would be better if we limited the time the children spend with you unsupervised. They are at impressionable ages, and consistency is important." The implication that I was somehow a negative influence on my own grandchildren felt like a physical blow. I looked at Frank, silently pleading for him to say something, to stand up for me and our relationship. "Dad, we just think it would be better this way," he said quietly. "For everyone." I left their house that day with a heaviness in my heart I hadn't felt since Margaret died. The distance between my son and me had never been greater, and now my access to my grandchildren was being formally restricted. A week later, I received a letter from their mortgage bank. It had been mistakenly sent to my address, likely because my name was associated with the account due to my regular contributions. The letter was a formal notice warning of potential foreclosure proceedings if the account remained delinquent. According to the document, they had missed 2 payments, despite my checks being sent on time. This revelation left me stunned. Where was the money going? I had been sending $1,500 every month to help with their $3,000 mortgage payment. Had they been using it for other expenses? Or worse, was Stephanie spending it on her luxury items while putting their home at risk? I drove to Frank's office the next day, determined to have an honest conversation away from Stephanie's influence. He seemed surprised to see me waiting in the parking lot after work. "Dad, is everything okay? Is it about Tyler?" "No, son. Tyler is fine, as far as I know. I received this in the mail yesterday," I said, handing him the letter. "It was sent to my address by mistake." Frank's face drained of color as he read it. "There must be a banking error," he said, but his voice lacked conviction. "Frank, I have been sending checks to help with the mortgage. $1,500 every month for the past 3 years. That's over $50,000. But according to this, you have missed payments. I need to know what's happening." His expression hardened. "Are you keeping tabs on me now? Checking up on my finances?" "I'm not a child, Dad. I'm concerned about you and my grandchildren," I persisted. "If you're having financial problems, we should talk about it. But I need honesty." "The truth is, you've never approved of Stephanie," he accused, deflecting. "You've judged her from day one because she wants nice things for our family." "This isn't about Stephanie's taste," I said, though in some ways it was. "It's about financial responsibility. You have 2 children to provide for. A stable home should be the priority." "So now I'm a bad father?" Frank's voice rose. "You know what, Dad? This is exactly why we need some distance. You're always judging, always thinking you know better. We don't need your money or your criticism." He thrust the letter back at me and walked to his car. "Don't come by the house for a while," he called over his shoulder. "We need some space." The final blow came when I tried to maintain contact with my grandchildren despite the growing rift with their parents. I sent cards and small gifts. I called on designated days that had previously been approved. But increasingly, my calls went unanswered, my texts unacknowledged. The most painful moment was missing Tyler's 7th birthday party. I had been told it would be a small family gathering the following weekend, only to see photos posted online of an elaborate superhero-themed celebration on his actual birthday. There were bouncy castles, professional face painters, and at least 20 children in attendance. Neither Frank nor Stephanie had thought to include me. That night, I sat alone in my apartment, looking at photos of Frank as a child, of Margaret holding him on the day he was born, of the three of us at his college graduation. Somewhere along the way, I had lost my son to a woman who seemed determined to erase me from their family narrative, and now I was losing my grandchildren too. Father's Day was approaching, and despite everything, I held onto a sliver of hope. Surely Frank would want to see me on that day, of all days. I had purchased his gift weeks in advance, a vintage watch similar to one my father had given me when I was a young man. I had it professionally restored and engraved with his initials. I hadn't received a formal invitation to any celebration, but I assumed that was an oversight. Even with our recent tensions, missing Father's Day seemed unimaginable. I planned to call Frank the day before to confirm details, hoping the special occasion might serve as a bridge to begin repairing our relationship. Then came the call that shattered that hope. I was preparing dinner when my phone rang. Seeing Stephanie's name on the screen gave me pause, but I answered with forced optimism. "Hello, Stephanie. How are you?" "Mac, I'm calling about Sunday," she began without pleasantries. "Frank and I have discussed it, and we think it would be better if you didn't come to our Father's Day dinner this year." The wooden spoon I was holding clattered to the floor. "I'm sorry, what did you say?" "We feel we need some family space right now," she continued, her tone businesslike. "The past few months have been tense, and we think a break would be beneficial." A break? On Father's Day? I struggled to comprehend what she was saying. "Stephanie, I am Frank's father. I am Jessica and Tyler's grandfather. How can you suggest I shouldn't be part of a Father's Day celebration?" "We just think it would be awkward given recent events," she replied. "Perhaps we can arrange something the following weekend if schedules permit." As she spoke, I heard a male voice in the background asking about dinner timing. It wasn't Frank's voice. "Is someone there with you?" I asked, though I already suspected the answer. "My father arrived early for the weekend," she said, a note of defensiveness creeping into her voice. "He's staying through Monday." The realization hit like a physical blow. I wasn't welcome at their Father's Day dinner, but her father was not only invited but staying for an extended visit. They were not canceling the celebration, just excluding me from it. "Does Frank know you're making this call?" I asked, my voice barely steady. "This was a joint decision," she replied smoothly. "Frank agrees. We need some space right now." "Put him on the phone," I requested. "I want to hear this from my son." "He's not available right now," she said quickly. "He took the kids to the store to pick up supplies for Sunday." "Supplies for the Father's Day dinner I'm not welcome to attend," I clarified, unable to keep the bitterness from my voice. "I have to go, Mac. I'll let Frank know we spoke," and with that, she hung up. I stood in my kitchen, phone in hand, feeling as though the floor had dropped out from under me. I tried calling Frank immediately, but the call went straight to voicemail. I left a message asking him to please call me back, trying to keep the hurt and anger out of my voice. He didn't return my call that evening, or the next day, or the day after that. Saturday afternoon, I was still waiting to hear from Frank when my neighbor Linda stopped by to return a gardening book she had borrowed. "Are you all set for tomorrow?" she asked casually, as I made her a cup of tea. "Tomorrow?" I repeated, not wanting to reveal the painful situation. "Father's Day," she clarified. "Aren't you spending it with Frank and those adorable grandchildren of yours?" I couldn't bring myself to explain that I had been uninvited, so I simply nodded vaguely. Linda, however, was more perceptive than I gave her credit for. "Mac, is everything okay? You don't seem yourself." Perhaps it was her kindness. Or perhaps the hurt had simply become too much to contain. But I found myself telling her everything. About Stephanie's controlling behavior, Frank's withdrawal, the financial support I'd provided with little acknowledgement, and finally, the painful call uninviting me from Father's Day. "That's terrible," Linda exclaimed, "especially after all you've done for them. My niece lives in their neighborhood, you know. She mentioned seeing quite the delivery yesterday. Some fancy electronic golf simulator thing being installed in their garage." "A golf simulator?" I repeated. Frank had mentioned wanting one months ago, but I distinctly remembered him saying they were far too expensive, with basic models starting around $8,000. "Apparently it was a Father's Day gift," Linda continued innocently. My niece said Stephanie was telling everyone what an amazing surprise it would be for both Frank and her father, who are both golf enthusiasts. Later that evening, still reeling from this information, I checked social media against my better judgment. There was Stephanie, posting photos of elaborate food preparations with the caption, "Ready for the best Father's Day celebration ever for the two most important men in my life." The two most important men in her life, her father and my son. I had been completely erased from the narrative. Even more painful was the message I received from Jessica through the game app we sometimes used to play virtual chess together. "Grandpa, why aren't you coming tomorrow? Mom said you were too busy. I made you a card and everything." The realization that Stephanie had lied to the children about my absence was the final straw. She hadn't simply uninvited me, she had made it seem like my choice, casting me as the grandfather too busy to spend Father's Day with his own grandchildren. That night, I sat alone in my apartment, surrounded by family photos and memories. The watch I had bought for Frank sat in its gift box on the coffee table, a painful reminder of the relationship we once had. On the wall hung the crude but heartfelt Father's Day painting Frank had made in second grade, "World's Greatest Dad," it proclaimed in wobbly letters. The contrast between that little boy who had loved me so completely and the man who would allow me to be excluded from Father's Day was almost too painful to bear. For the first time since Margaret died, I felt truly, devastatingly alone. But as I sat there, something else began to stir alongside the pain, a sense of clarity. A realization that I had allowed this situation to develop by constantly giving without expectations, by accepting disrespect, by financing a lifestyle that was neither sustainable nor honest. Tomorrow would be Father's Day, and I would spend it alone. But the day after that would be different. Something had to change, and I finally found the resolve to be the one to change it. Monday morning, I woke up with a sense of purpose I hadn't felt in months. Father's Day had come and gone with no call from Frank, not even a text message. The silence was deafening, but it also confirmed what I needed to do. My first call was to Walter, my financial advisor of 20 years. "I need an appointment today if possible," I told him. "It's about my financial arrangements with my son." Walter, efficient as always, scheduled me for 11 that morning. His office was in a modest building downtown, nothing flashy, which was one of the reasons I trusted him. Walter believed in substance over style, just as I did. "Mac, good to see you," he greeted me with a firm handshake, "though I detect this isn't a social visit." "I need some perspective, Walter," I said as I took a seat across from his desk. "I've been helping my son and his wife with their mortgage for the past 3 years, $1,500 a month." Walter's eyebrows rose. "That's a substantial ongoing commitment. Was this structured as a loan or a gift?" "It was never formally defined," I admitted. "Initially, it was to help with the down payment, but it evolved into monthly support." Walter pulled up my financial records on his computer. "Mac, that represents over $54,000 over 3 years. Given your retirement income and assets, this is a significant percentage of your available funds." He turned the screen toward me, showing a graph of my withdrawals and projected retirement resources. "If this continues at the current rate, you'll deplete your savings approximately 8 years sooner than projected." The visual representation of my financial situation was sobering. I had known I was spending significant amounts on Frank and Stephanie, but seeing it quantified made the reality inescapable. "There's more," I said, explaining the mortgage delinquency notice and what Linda had told me about the expensive golf simulator. "I believe they're using my contributions for luxury purchases while falling behind on the very mortgage I'm trying to help them pay." Walter leaned back in his chair, his expression grave. "Mac, I've known you for many years. You're generous to a fault, especially with your family. But this situation sounds like enabling rather than helping." "That's what I'm afraid of," I agreed. "From a strictly financial perspective, continuing this arrangement is inadvisable," Walter said. "Your retirement security should be your primary concern at this stage. But I sense there are emotional considerations as well." I nodded, thinking of Jessica and Tyler. "My grandchildren live in that house. I don't want them to suffer or be displaced." "A difficult situation," Walter acknowledged. "But consider this. By constantly bailing out your son and daughter-in-law, you may be preventing them from developing financial responsibility. Sometimes, the kindest thing we can do is allow people to face the consequences of their choices." I left Walter's office with a clear financial perspective, but still struggling with the emotional ramifications of what I was considering. On my walk home, I passed by Community Bank where my checking account was held. On impulse, I went inside. Mary, the branch manager, had assisted me many times over the years. "Mac, what can I do for you today?" she asked warmly. "I need to stop payment on a check," I said, "and I want to cancel my automatic monthly transfer to this account." I showed her the details of the mortgage account where I sent my contributions. "We can certainly do that," Mary assured me. "The check can be stopped immediately if it hasn't been processed yet, and I'll cancel the automatic transfer effective immediately." "Thank you," I said, feeling a strange mixture of relief and apprehension as I signed the necessary forms. That evening, I sat at my small writing desk and composed a letter to Frank. I wanted to explain my decision calmly and clearly, without the emotion that might overwhelm a phone conversation. I wrote, "Dear Frank, I am writing to inform you that I have stopped payment on this month's mortgage contribution and will not be making any further payments. This decision wasn't made lightly, but after careful consideration of recent events, including being excluded from Father's Day and discovering that the mortgage is delinquent despite my regular contributions. For 3 years, I have provided $1,500 monthly to help with your family's housing security. I did this out of love, not obligation. However, it has become clear that this arrangement is no longer beneficial for any of us. Financial support without accountability has not helped you develop sound financial management, and it has strained rather than strengthened our relationship. I will always be your father, and I will always love you. My door remains open for a relationship based on mutual respect. I hope that one day we can rebuild what has been lost. With love, Dad." I mailed the letter the next morning, knowing that I would likely hear from them as soon as it arrived or when they discovered the stopped payment, whichever came first. The response came 3 days later, not in the form of a thoughtful reply, but as an angry phone call from Stephanie. "How dare you?" she began without preamble when I answered. "You can't just cut us off without warning." "Hello, Stephanie," I replied calmly. I sent Frank a letter explaining my decision. "A letter?" she scoffed. "This isn't the 1800s, Mac. You've put us in an impossible position. The mortgage is due next week." "The mortgage has been due every month," I pointed out, "including the months when you apparently didn't pay it despite my contributions." There was a momentary silence on the other end of the line. "Financial management is complex," she finally said. "You wouldn't understand how tight things are for young families today." "I understand that choices have consequences," I replied, "and I've made my choice." "You're being spiteful because we needed family time on Father's Day," she accused. "This is exactly why Frank wanted space from you. You're controlling and manipulative." I almost laughed at the irony of her accusation. "Stephanie, I've given your family over $50,000 with no strings attached. I've accepted being marginalized and excluded. If that's your definition of controlling, we have very different dictionaries." "Well, don't expect to see your grandchildren if this is how you're going to be," she threatened. "Actions have consequences, as you said." The threat to use the children as leverage hurt deeply, but I refused to be manipulated any longer. "Yes, they do. Goodbye, Stephanie." I had barely put the phone down when it rang again. This time it was Frank. "Dad, what the hell?" he began. "You can't just cut us off like this. We have a mortgage payment due, and now we're scrambling to cover it." "Frank, did you read my letter?" I asked. "Yes, I read your sanctimonious letter," he snapped. "So, we missed a payment or two. Things have been tight." "Things have been tight while you installed an $8,000 golf simulator?" I questioned. Another telling silence. "You've been spying on us?" "No, Frank. People talk. Neighbors notice large deliveries. The same way I found out about the Father's Day dinner I wasn't welcome to attend." "That was Stephanie's call," he said quickly. "Her father was visiting, and she thought it would be awkward." "And you allowed it," I pointed out. "You could have stood up for me, for our relationship. You chose not to." "So this is punishment?" he asked bitterly. "Financial manipulation because your feelings were hurt?" "This is a necessary boundary," I corrected him. "One I should have established long ago. I love you, Frank. I always will. But I won't continue to fund a lifestyle while being treated as an afterthought in your life." "If that's how you feel, maybe we need an even longer break," he said coldly. "Don't call us. We'll call you if and when we're ready." The line went dead, and I sat heavily in my chair, feeling both wounded and strangely liberated. The bridges were burning, but perhaps that was necessary for new ones to be built eventually. A week later, I received an unexpected visitor. I was watering my balcony plants when I heard a small voice call out, "Grandpa!" I turned to see Jessica standing in my doorway, accompanied by a woman I recognized as Alicia, Stephanie's former co-worker from the real estate office. "Jessica! What a wonderful surprise!" I exclaimed, putting down my watering can to embrace my granddaughter. "Mr. Williams, I hope you don't mind," Alicia said. "Jessica asked if I could bring her to see you when I picked up my son from their playdate. I know things are complicated right now, but she was very insistent." "Of course, I don't mind," I assured her. "And please, call me Mac." After Alicia left, promising to return in an hour, Jessica looked up at me with serious eyes. "Mom said you don't want to see us anymore. But that doesn't make sense because you always want to see us." My heart ached at the misconception. "Jessica, that's not true at all. I always want to see you and Tyler. More than anything. Then why didn't you come to Father's Day? And why is Mom so angry at you? She and Dad were fighting about money, and your name came up." I sat down next to her on the sofa, choosing my words carefully. Sometimes grown-ups disagree about things, and they need time to work through their feelings. "But that has nothing to do with how much I love you and Tyler. Dad seems really worried," she confided. "I heard him telling Mom they might have to sell the simulator thing they just got for Grandpa Jim." So Stephanie's father was Grandpa Jim, while I had been relegated to just Mac in my own grandchildren's lives. Another small hurt in a growing collection. "Your parents will figure things out," I assured her. "They're smart people." "Will you come see us again?" she asked plaintively. "As soon as your parents say it's okay," I promised, knowing it might be a long wait. After Jessica left, I felt both heartbroken and more resolved. My grandchildren were caught in the middle of this situation, but continuing to enable Frank and Stephanie's financial irresponsibility wouldn't ultimately help anyone. That evening, I looked around my modest apartment and realized how much I had been living in a holding pattern, focused entirely on Frank and his family while neglecting my own life. It was time for a change on multiple fronts. I couldn't control how Frank and Stephanie responded to my boundary setting, but I could control how I moved forward. I picked up the phone and called my old friend Roger, whom I hadn't seen in months due to being constantly on call for Frank's family. "Roger, how about that fishing trip we keep talking about? I'm finally free next weekend." It was time to start living my own life again, with or without my son's approval. The financial reality hit Frank and Stephanie hard and fast. Without my monthly contribution, they found themselves scrambling to cover not only the current mortgage payment but also to address the existing delinquency. Through mutual acquaintances and occasional updates from neighbors, I learned of the changes unfolding in their lives. 2 weeks after our confrontation, Stephanie's luxury sedan was replaced by a more modest used car. A month later, Linda mentioned seeing a estate sale sign at their address over the weekend. They were selling all sorts of things, she reported. Designer furniture, that golf simulator thing that had just been installed, some artwork. Stephanie did not look happy about it at all. Most significantly, I heard through Roger's wife, who worked at the same company as Frank, that Stephanie had returned to work. Not at another real estate agency as they had claimed, but at a retail position at the mall, a step down from her previous career, but the only job she could secure quickly. "Barbara said Frank has been bringing his lunch to work every day instead of going out," Roger told me during our fishing trip, "and he's been asking about overtime opportunities." While I took no pleasure in their financial struggles, I recognized them as necessary steps toward responsibility. The lifestyle they had built was unsustainable without my subsidies, and the sooner they recognized that, the better off they would be in the long run. My own life was undergoing significant changes as well. With the burden of supporting a second household lifted, I felt a renewed sense of financial security. More importantly, I reclaimed my time and energy for my own pursuits. I joined a community garden project, volunteering twice a week to help maintain the plots and teach local children about growing vegetables. I reconnected with old friends and made new ones through a photography class at the senior center. I even began planning a road trip along the coast, something Margaret and I had always talked about doing in retirement but never got around to. 3 months after our falling out, I received a text message from Frank. It was brief but significant. "Dad, can we meet for coffee sometime this week?" Just the two of us. We arranged to meet at a small cafe, halfway between our homes. When Frank arrived, I was shocked by his appearance. He had lost weight, and there were new lines around his eyes that spoke of stress and sleepless nights. "Thanks for meeting me," he said as he sat down across from me, his coffee clutched between his hands like a lifeline. "Of course," I replied. "It's good to see you, son." An awkward silence stretched between us before Frank finally spoke. "Things have been tough since we last talked. We had to make a lot of changes." "I heard Stephanie is working at the mall," I said neutrally. Frank nodded. "At the jewelry counter. She hates it, but we didn't have many options." "The mortgage," he trailed off, looking embarrassed. "Were you able to catch up on the payments?" I asked. "Barely," he admitted. "We had to sell a lot of stuff, take out a personal loan with a terrible interest rate. It's been a wake-up call." I nodded but didn't comment further, waiting for him to continue. "I've been doing a lot of thinking," Frank said slowly. "About our relationship, about the way things have been these past few years. I didn't handle Father's Day well. I should have stood up for you." "Yes, you should have," I agreed quietly. "Stephanie and I," he hesitated. "We've been having problems. The financial stress, her having to work a job she considers beneath her. It's been rough. We started seeing a marriage counselor, and some uncomfortable truths have come to light." "Such as?" I prompted when he fell silent again. "She has some issues with spending, more serious than I realized, and she had been lying about a lot of things, including her employment status and our finances." He looked up at me with tired eyes. "You knew, didn't you? That's partly why you stopped the payments." "I suspected," I acknowledged. "The mortgage delinquency notice was a major red flag, but Frank, my decision wasn't just about money, it was about respect and boundaries." He nodded slowly. "The counselor said something similar, about how financial dependency can create unhealthy relationship dynamics." He took a deep breath. "Dad, I'm sorry for how we treated you. For how I allowed you to be treated, it was wrong." The apology, while appreciated, seemed insufficient given the years of disrespect and the painful exclusion from Father's Day. But it was a start. "I appreciate that, Frank. Where do we go from here?" "I don't know exactly," he admitted, "but I'd like to try to rebuild our relationship, and I know the kids miss you terribly. Especially Jessica. She talks about you all the time." "I miss them too," I said, my voice catching slightly. "More than I can express." "Would you be willing to come to dinner next weekend?" he asked tentatively. "It won't be anything fancy. We can't afford fancy anymore, but it would mean a lot to the kids. And to me." I considered the invitation, weighing my desire to see my grandchildren against the risk of falling back into old patterns. "What about Stephanie? How does she feel about this?" Frank's expression tightened slightly. "She's coming to terms with our new reality. The counselor suggested family therapy might be beneficial for all of us, including you if you're willing, to address the dynamics that led us here." It wasn't a direct answer, but it suggested Stephanie wasn't entirely on board yet, was at least acknowledging the need for change. It was probably the best I could hope for at this stage. "I'd like that," I said finally. "Dinner next weekend sounds good, and I'm open to the family therapy idea if everyone else is committed to it." As we parted ways, Frank gave me an awkward hug, the first physical contact we'd had in months. It wasn't a complete resolution, but it was a beginning. The changes continued to unfold in the following weeks. Frank and Stephanie put their oversized house on the market, preparing to downsize to something more within their means. Stephanie's father, who had been a frequent and pampered visitor, suddenly became scarce when the luxury guest room and golf outings were no longer available. My relationship with my son began a slow, sometimes painful process of reconstruction. There were setbacks and difficult conversations. Old habits and dynamics tried to reassert themselves. But there was also progress, moments of genuine connection that reminded me of the close relationship we had once shared. Most precious to me was the renewed relationship with my grandchildren. Jessica and Tyler greeted my return to their lives with unguarded joy, and I treasured every moment with them, now structured around meaningful activities rather than expensive outings or gifts. "Can we still go to the library, Grandpa?" Jessica asked during my first visit back. "And get ice cream after?" "Every Tuesday, if your parents agree," I assured her, my heart full at the simple request that represented our special tradition. As for me, I continued to nurture my own independent life alongside the rebuilding family connections. I found a balance I had been missing for years, one where I could be a supportive father and grandfather without sacrificing my own well-being or enabling destructive behaviors. It wasn't perfect, and perhaps it never would be, but it was honest, and it was built on mutual respect rather than financial dependence. That alone made it stronger than what we had before. 6 months after that first tentative coffee meeting with Frank, we gathered at my apartment for a special dinner. It was a milestone of sorts, marking half a year of gradual healing and rebuilding of our family bonds. Frank and Stephanie had completed their move to a modest 3-bedroom townhouse that better matched their actual income. The children had adjusted well to the change, especially since the new place was closer to their school and friends. Frank arrived first with the kids, while Stephanie came later directly from her job. She now worked as an administrative assistant at a local insurance office, a position that paid less than real estate but offered stability and benefits they desperately needed. "Mac," she greeted me with a stiff but civil nod. Our relationship remained the most strained, but she had made visible efforts to be respectful, if not warm. "Stephanie, thank you for coming," I replied, genuinely appreciative of her willingness to participate in the family reconciliation process. "I brought dessert," she said, holding out a store-bought apple pie. 6 months ago, she would have considered such a humble offering beneath her, insisting on gourmet pastries from the expensive bakery across town. "Perfect," I said. "The kids love apple pie." As we sat down to dinner, I noticed how different the family dynamic had become. Frank spoke up more, no longer deferring automatically to Stephanie. The children were more relaxed, less worried about adhering to rigid expectations. Stephanie herself seemed less focused on appearances and more present in the moment, actually listening when Jessica talked about her science project instead of checking her phone. The family therapy sessions had been challenging but productive. Under the guidance of Dr. Marshall, we had addressed the unhealthy patterns that had developed over years. Frank had acknowledged his role in allowing me to be marginalized. Stephanie had confronted her spending addiction and the insecurity that drove it. I had recognized my own tendency to use financial support as a way to maintain control and relevance in their lives. None of us was blameless, and acknowledging that had been crucial to moving forward. After dinner, as the children helped clear the table, a task they would never have been assigned in the old days, Frank pulled me aside. "Dad, I wanted to give you this," he said, handing me an envelope. Inside was a check for $1,500, along with a handwritten note. "First repayment. There will be more as we can manage it. With love and gratitude, Frank." "Son, this isn't necessary," I began, but he shook his head. "It is to me," he insisted. "We can't repay everything immediately, but we're committed to paying back what we can over time. Not just because of the money, but because it represents taking responsibility." I was touched by the gesture, not for the financial aspect but for what it symbolized about Frank's growth. Later that evening, after Frank's family had departed and I was alone again in my apartment, I reflected on the journey of the past year. From the painful exclusion from Father's Day to the difficult but necessary decision to stop enabling their financial irresponsibility, from the angry confrontations to the gradual rebuilding of trust and respect. The hardest lesson I had learned was that true love sometimes requires allowing people to face the consequences of their actions. By constantly shielding Frank and Stephanie from the results of their choices, I had contributed to the very problems I resented. My financial support, given without accountability, had enabled Stephanie's spending habits and Frank's avoidance of responsibility. I had also learned the importance of valuing myself enough to establish boundaries. For years, I had accepted disrespect and marginalization, afraid that standing up for myself would mean losing my son and grandchildren. Ironically, it was only when I finally took that risk that I created the possibility for a healthier relationship with them all. The following Father's Day was a stark contrast to the one that had precipitated our family crisis. Frank insisted on hosting a barbecue at their new, modest home, with both Stephanie's father and me in attendance. There was an initial awkwardness between Jim and me, but as the day progressed, we found common ground in our love for our grandchildren and our shared experience as fathers watching our adult children navigate life's challenges. "Your son has really stepped up," Jim commented, as we watched Frank teaching Tyler how to properly flip burgers on the grill. "Stephanie says he's a different man these days." He found his way back to himself, I replied. Sometimes we all need a course correction. The greatest gift that day wasn't the heartfelt card Jessica had made or the hand-carved fishing lure Tyler had selected. It was the moment when Frank raised his glass and said, "To the dads. Thank you for your love, your wisdom, and, yes, even your boundaries. We wouldn't be who we are without you." As I look back on that difficult chapter of our lives now, I realize that what seemed like an ending was actually a beginning. By canceling that mortgage check, I wasn't just changing a financial arrangement. I was creating space for a new kind of relationship based on mutual respect rather than dependency. Sometimes love means saying no. Sometimes the greatest gift we can give those we care about is the opportunity to stand on their own feet. And sometimes, what feels like rejection can be the catalyst for profound growth and healing. Have you ever had to make a difficult decision for the good of someone you love, even when they couldn't see it that way? I'd love to hear your stories in the comments below. Remember to like and subscribe if this story resonated with you, and share it with someone who might need to hear that setting boundaries is an act of love, not rejection. Thank you for listening, and until next time, treasure your family relationships but never forget to value yourself as well.